I only wanted my TV fixed, but what I got was a man's hand on mine, a dinner that felt like a date, and a question I hadn't dared to ask since my husband died. Am I allowed to feel this again? Welcome to the channel, where real stories meet raw emotion. If you've ever felt invisible or longed to be truly seen again, this story might hit closer than you expect. Have you ever shared a quiet moment with someone that changed everything? Would you open the door to something new, even if it came too late? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Your voice matters here. And if this story speaks to you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. Someone out there might need this just as much as you did. It all began on a calm Thursday afternoon, when time seemed to be moving more slowly than normal. I had just finished folding the last of the laundry, my hands still smelling of lavender, when I sat down with a cup of lukewarm coffee on the couch. I was intended to have some peace during that time, she wrote. My guilty pleasure was watching a rerun of Murder. The TV screen then went black with a snap and a flicker. I initially thought it might have been a power surge or a loose cable. I tried unplugging and replugging everything, messed with the remote, and pressed every button I could think of, but to no avail. Static only. And quiet. Now, I've never considered myself tech-savvy. I've perfected the art of online grocery shopping, and I know how to access Netflix. But is there anything more difficult? Let's just say that I'm not comfortable with it. That's when David came to mind. After his wife passed away, David, my next-door neighbor, moved in around 2 years ago. He was a modest man in his early 60s, courteous and constantly smiling softly. Despite his tendency to keep to himself, I felt safe approaching him for a favor, because we had had enough courteous chats over the fence and occasional yard maintenance assistance. Feeling a little foolish for requiring assistance with something so simple, I put on my cardigan, pushed a few loose hairs behind my ears, and approached with my cup still in hand. His home was identical to mine. It was simple, clean, and had a garden in front that was filled with those little blue flowers I couldn't recall the name of. I gave the door a gentle knock. A little later, I heard steady, slow footfall, and then the creak of the door opening. David blinked a few times, perhaps caught off guard, but then his face softened. "Hello, David," I began, grinning. "I'm sorry to bother you, but I think I've done something to my TV and, well, I was wondering if you might take a look." "Sure," he said. "Let me get my shoes." When we got back to my house, I stayed close by, trying not to hover, while he stood in the living room, surveying the tangled mess of cords behind the TV. I chuckled, perhaps a bit too loudly, but he remarked, "You know, you've got half of Best Buy plugged in back here." That seems about right. The screen blinked back to life within minutes after my son set it up before he moved, and I've been too afraid to touch it. The room filled with the familiar melody from my show, and I sighed with relief. He wiped his hands on his pants and remarked, "There we go. Just a loose HDMI connection." "HT? What?" he laughed. Never mind. I thanked him with coffee, which he took, much to my surprise, and we sat in the sunroom, the one I rarely used but always kept tidy. I gave him a mug and admitted, "I never come in here." It feels like a room meant for someone else's life. The late afternoon light poured in through the glass panels, creating warm patterns on the wooden floor. He took a lengthy sip while gazing out at the lovely, serene backyard. We chatted for a long time about everything and nothing. He told me how lonely the house had been since his wife passed away, and how he had taken up wood carving as a way to pass the time. I listened more than I spoke, but that was also comforting. I found out that he had taught high school shop class. A type of silence, not awkward but delicate, changed between us as the shadows lengthened. He gazed at me then, not in that direct, obvious way, but with a kind of delicate intensity that made me feel seen. The type of silence you don't need to fill. Nobody had truly looked at me in that way in a long time, not as a widow, a mother, or a neighbor, just me. I broke the moment by clearing my throat and getting up. I suppose I should let you resume your evening. Again, thank you, David. Without my performances, I would have gone crazy. He rose up as well, paused for a while, and then nodded. You know where I am? Anytime, he murmured. I leaned against the door for a second, my heart pounding silently as I shut it behind him. The next several days went by without incident, but I couldn't get rid of the strange flutter that had taken up residence in my chest. It was just a neighbor assisting with a TV, right? But something about it didn't feel so straightforward. Every time I passed the sunroom or changed the channel on the TV, I couldn't help but think about David. It wasn't a school drill, euphoric kind of way, but rather a soft, familiar song that I couldn't quite place, lingering. It was a one-time favor, a neighborly gesture, and I hadn't anticipated him returning. However, he was squatting by his garden with a trowel in hand, wearing a baseball cap that was a bit too big for his head, and humming something under his breath when I went outside on Sunday morning to tend to my roses. I paused since he appeared serene, as if he were ensconced in his own little world. However, he glanced up and met my gaze. "Good morning," he replied with a smile. He looked across at the tulips and I repeated, rubbing my palms on my jeans. "They're coming in well." "It must be your magic touch, because yours usually comes in first." I laughed, even though my cheeks started to become a little warm. He got up and brushed his hands. Or beginner's luck. I still look up pruning tips on Google every spring. I prepared too much stew last night, and I would hate to waste it, so I was wondering if you would be willing to assist me get rid of the leftovers. His invitation felt more significant than it should have, which is why I hesitated. Not because I didn't want to, but rather because, to be honest, I hadn't had company at my kitchen table in a while. Later that afternoon, I was sitting in his kitchen with a bowl of handmade beef stew simmering in front of me, but I nodded nevertheless. "That sounds great." We chatted over lunch, and this time the conversation went a little deeper. The room was comfortable, lived in, with pictures of his children and grandchildren lining the top of a little hutch and a few of Burr houses sitting on the windowsill. I shared tidbits about my own late husband, the years of laughter, frustration, and compromise, about the quiet house he left behind, and how the silence had a way of settling into the walls. He told me about his wife, Janet, how they met in college, how she used to make peach cobbler every Sunday, and how cancer took her too quickly. At one point, we simply looked at one another, understanding one another without exchanging words or providing an explanation. I questioned him gently, not really sure why I said it. "Do you ever feel like you're waiting for something?" David put down his spoon and cocked his head slightly. Two people who had survived life's storms and were still standing, still turning up, still trying. I gulped hard when I realized that perhaps I was waiting for someone rather than something. I stayed by the door a little longer than I should have after helping to clear the dishes, since there was nothing suggestive in his tone, nothing forward or forceful, just a straightforward truth expressed kindly and strangely that made it even more disarming. I responded, "Thank you, not just for the stew, but for the company." He smiled at me again, that gentle smile that didn't try too hard, and continued, "You're always welcome here." I nodded, experiencing a peculiar pain under my ribs that was more like hope than despair. There was no dramatic music, no fireworks, no sweeping gesture, just the subtle sense that something had changed between us. something small but real, as I walked back to my house and noticed how the wind rustled the trees just a little and how the afternoon sun had dipped into that golden glow I always loved. I was thinking about that warm kitchen and the man next door that night as I nestled under my blanket as the TV flickered in front of me, and I didn't really pay much attention to the show. The following week had an odd, reassuring cadence. There was a subtle agreement between David and myself. No formal plans, no planned dinners, no pretense of niggly obligations. Sometimes he would leave me a few tomatoes from his garden or a slice of something he had baked. Banana bread, cornbread, things that tasted like time and care. And other times I would see him sitting on his porch with his carving tools and a mug of tea, and I would wander over and pretend I was just passing by. We didn't discuss what was going on between us, but it was there. He would glance up before I even knocked, and I would find myself changing my blouse or straightening my hair before going outside. One evening, right after dinner, I was astonished to hear a tap on my door. I opened it, feeling strangely anxious because David normally waited for me to arrive. He was standing there with a small wooden box in his hands, and he murmured, "I was working on this," while glancing into my eyes. It was smooth to the touch, carved from cherry wood, with a tiny flower etched into the lid, one of those blue ones from his garden, and, "I don't know, I just thought maybe you'd like it." He handed it to me with a sort of calm reverence. I mumbled, "I don't know what to say, David," as I ran my fingertips over the design, my heart fluttering. "It's beautiful." I let him in and he shrugged a little, but his eyes were full of something that he didn't express. We sat in the sunroom once more, and this time I brought out 2 glasses of wine. Normally, I don't drink during the week, but tonight felt different, like something deserved to be toasted, even if we didn't name it. The house smelled like cinnamon from a candle I'd lit earlier, and the lamps cast a golden glow over everything, making the room feel softer, warmer. I nodded at the box and said, "You're very talented." He laughed. "It helps me think and keeps my hands busy." I asked, not really looking at him, "What do you think about?" He paused, then whispered softly, "You." Heart pounding, I looked up and saw it. I'm not sure what I was expecting at the time. I could have laughed it off, changed the topic, or pretended not to hear him, but I didn't. We sat in silence, the sort that doesn't need to be filled, and the air felt heavier, charged, but not uncomfortable, so I murmured, "I've been thinking about you too." He gave me the same intense look he had given me on the first day in the sunroom, and I didn't turn away this time. "You know," he added in a low voice, "I thought that part of my life was over when Janet died. Not just the marriage, the connection, the sense of being seen." I nodded, knowing better than he did. I admitted that I had felt invisible for years, even in social situations, particularly at that time. He whispered, "You're not invisible." Not to me. And there it was, that silent truth between us once more. He did not lean in or reach for my hand. It was genuine, unforced, and unhurried. When he finally got up to go, I felt something settle inside of me that I hadn't felt in a very long time. He just sat there with me, sharing the space, the moment, and the weight of everything unsaid. Maybe. He stopped and turned around before going outside. "Would you like to come over for dinner tomorrow night?" he asked. I grinned and added, "I'd like that." I was considering preparing peach cobbler, and I meant it with all my heart. The following evening, when I came into David's house, it smelled like baked fruit and cinnamon, one of those gentle golden hours when the sun is low and everything outside seemed to have been coated with honey. "Dinner's almost ready, but I might need a second opinion on the cobbler," he added, greeting me with an apron sprinkled with flour and the same soft grin that had begun to feel familiar. "That's a lot of pressure." What if I'm a tough critic? I laughed as I entered. Unwilling to take the risk, he continued, his gaze warm and playful. The effort didn't shout romance, rather it murmured it, subtly, respectfully, and the table was set simply, with only 2 plates, cloth napkins, and a small vase of those little blue flowers from his garden. After dinner, he brought out the cobbler, golden and bubbling, with a scoop of vanilla ice cream already melting on top. We chatted over roasted chicken and green beans with almonds, the kind of comfort food that tasted like time and care. It was easy to talk now, like old friends who had finally started saying the things they used to only think. I closed my eyes and took a piece. "All right," I replied, trying to sound serious. "This might be the best peach cobbler I've had since 1994. I'll take that as a victory." After that, we went to the Ligon room, where an old jazz record was playing softly in the background and the lights were dim. David laughed. He sat next to me on the couch, not too close, but closer than before, and we didn't need to chat much. At one point, he turned to me and said softly, "I hope this doesn't sound foolish, but I like being around you." There was a sense of ease in the silence, a calm that comes when 2 people stop acting like strangers. I took a moment to look at him, at the gentle creases around his eyes, at the way his hands were resting peacefully in his lap, at the man who had appeared in little ways that had somehow transformed everything. "It felt easy." "Right," I said. "It sounds through. It doesn't sound foolish." Then, without showing much courage or drama, he extended his hand between us, palm up, as if to ask a question, and I put mine in his. It was warm, steady, and familiar. After a while, I rested my head on his shoulder, and he released a breath I was unaware he had been holding. There was no hurry, no need to say anything. A few weeks later, nothing changed overnight, but inside it felt like time stopped, just for us. Outside, the world went on, with cars passing, a dog barking in the distance, and the last birds calling it a night. Even while we still had our separate homes and routines, there was a gentle thread that connected our days, shared meals, morning check-ins, and the occasional giggle over how much I still didn't grasp about HEMI cables. There were no huge pledges or pronouncements, only gifts. In a strange sense, that was more than enough. One afternoon, I was sitting in my sunroom with the wooden box David had built on the windowsill, packed with old letters and pictures, fragments of a life that seemed distant at the time, but was now nearby. I reflected on how unexpected everything had been. How a broken TV had led to a conversation, which led to a meal, which led to something quietly extraordinary, not a fairy tale, something real, and how at this point in life, real is far more precious than perfect. I watched the sunlight hitting the lid, bringing out the grain in the wood, the flower carving catching the light,